Hi, everyone. I'm April Callis-Birchmeier, certified change management professional and project management professional. I want to share with you some exciting information around change management, really specifically change management in action. We're going to talk about some real life, real world applications as well as success stories. I think there's a tendency sometimes, particularly when you're using the standard to prepare for the CCMP exam, or you're thinking theoretically. Perhaps you're, doing a lot of research research and study around the organizational change management as a discipline. I think it's easy to lose track of the real world uh, successes that we have with organizational change management. So I want to share that with you today. So, what makes change management successful? Well, I think that one of the big pieces that's important to recognize is that when you understand and define up in kind of the early beginning of change, when you define what success looks like and you start to put some measurement around success, it can be simpler to know when you've arrived. And I found this to be true. There have been changes that I've worked on where we spent a lot of time thinking about what success would look like and how we plan to measure along the way to ensure that we're successful. And measuring along the way and knowing what to look for is a terrific way to know where you stand in terms of your success. Are you on track? Are you on target? Are you off track? Have you been working for 6 months and nobody's even heard of this change? I think many of the tools that we can use to measure how we're doing in terms of our success rate with our change are things like focus groups and interviews and surveys and other forms of feedback. When we can receive feedback, when we know what to ask to receive the feedback that we need to see, it can help us to plan for the structure and to plan on how we're doing in terms of reaching the benefit of this change, reaching our success. Many times I talk with groups and my students in particular about change adoption. Change adoption is the change in behavior and mindset that we see when people have made it to that future state and start to realize the benefits of change. That's when we know we're successful. When the old way of doing things is no longer the right way of doing things. When the old way of doing things sort of fades from the memory as the new is sustained and adopted. And so that's one of the ways we can check if we're being successful with change management. But I was going to mention that sometimes I come in early on a project and we have a lot of time to think about what it is that will help us decide if people have adopted the behaviors and mindset that are needed for that future state to be able to realize the benefits of the change. Sometimes I think about the fact that I come in very late to a project. Sometimes I'm showing up right at the end when suddenly it looks like things are off track. And I also enjoy that challenge. I'm not saying I only like to be up front. I also like the challenge of trying to figure out what we can do to save save the success of the project. Sometimes we have to rebaseline. Sometimes we may have to reorganize a structure. Sometimes we even have to change the way we plan to roll the project out. And it reminds me of a project that I was on in 2015. I was working on a large project, and a smaller project came along and said, "Could you help us with a few things?" And I really didn't think it was going to be a large project at the time. I thought it would just be a little bit of help. But what ended up happening was, because I looked at where the change management work and activities were, which was that they hadn't really been started yet, and they didn't even have a good sense of who those stakeholder groups were and how to communicate with them. we ended up rebaselining that project. We ended up, instead of going live 6 weeks out from the time that I was engaged with the project, instead of bringing that project live and suffering through a lot of stakeholder frustration and anger and resentment and lack of knowledge, instead of doing that in a 6 week period, we rebaselined the project and we kept the technical team working. They kept working against their project plan and on their milestones, which was fantastic. But we didn't need to roll it out to the stakeholders until we were really ready. And so it gave us this opportunity to rethink the way we were doing rollouts. And so instead of going forward with what could have been a very disastrous rollout in June, we actually waited until February to start rolling this out to the various stakeholder groups. And by then, we'd had a lot of time for change management activities, for communication, for our sponsor to lead and share with everybody what needed to happen and why and when. And we built some fantastic tools for the stakeholders as well. And when we did roll out, we rolled out in 4 smaller wave rollouts rather than going forward with the big 6 week, big bang. Let's just let everybody have access. We changed the way we rolled out, and it really changed the experience for the end users. They were very happy. It was a very successful project, and I was really thrilled that even though it looked as though we didn't have time to do a real change management effort, we did. We did have time because we just changed our expectations of when this needed to be accessible to our stakeholders. So I've had more than 25 years of leading organizational change on so many projects that sometimes I forget what those projects were. And then I think, oh, yes, I remember we did something similar to this. One example that I felt was especially rewarding and successful, because we got off to a rough start, was an electric health record, EHR program. And we had started with a practice. This was being rolled out to various physician practices, physicians' offices, and they had between, I'd say, 2 and maybe 15 physicians in each of these different practices. And there were more than 25 practices. And in these physicians' practices, the first one we did was pretty tough. We learned a lot, which is usually what happens when you have a tough experience. But we also were not satisfied with how that experience rolled out for the providers and the front desk, as well as the billing folks in that practice. So it gave me a way to really think differently. How would it be better? How could it be better? And one of the ways that we ended up changing the rollout plan was that instead of trying to kind of one by one lead each practice separately as though they were separate entities, we ended up stacking them. We stacked them like with 45 days in between each practice, but they had a 3-month window. So we had a 3-month window and then a 45-day implementation kind of standoff, if you will, and then we'd go. And by making this into more of a community effort, we also started to build a community with the practice managers. Those are the men and women who lead the front desk and the physicians, and they are essential to a practice. And in our first iteration, we had a tough time with roles, with understanding who needed to know what and when. So once we had gotten that figured out, we put everybody on a schedule, and we scheduled a series of meetings that would start with 120 days out, then 90, then 60, then 30, then 10, then 2, then go live. And by doing this, and they were staggered by 45 days each, we were able to really help the group that was in front of us go live successfully. We built a lot of systems and processes that were repeatable, that we did time and time again, including a dress rehearsal where we had mock patients come in, and then we would use the testing system to check that everything was working in terms of the process, the business process within that practice. It was enjoyable. We loved having our dress rehearsals. We ended up having many of our team members served as mock patients with mock illnesses, and they would be checked in by the front desk staff with the new software, the EHR software. They would be roomed for the MA. The MA would take care of their vitals and prepare for the visit. And then that provider would come in, and then they would use their system to have the mock exam. And then we would check them out and go through billing. And by doing this on this cadence of every practice went live 45 days after the one before, but they were all on this same schedule of 120, 90, 60, 30. It was a real success because if a practice kind of fell behind on the work that they needed to do, we could move them back. We could move them to the end. They wouldn't be completely off of our schedule. They would just have to move back a little further. And it would give us time to kind of reevaluate, was there something that we had missed? It was a very successful process. And the thing that I enjoyed the most, though, was connecting those practice managers to each other. We would have every other week a practice manager meeting. And this practice manager meeting, I would generally facilitate the meeting and communicate about things that we needed for the next milestone they were on, and also how to fill those out and what to think about different process pieces. And those people who had already gone live would also give their input and talk about things that they had learned. So it was this fantastic opportunity to really connect with each other. They didn't normally see each other because they all led separate practices. It was this terrific opportunity for them to meet each other, to share with each other some of the ups and downs that they were going through with this implementation, to share successes, to share failures so that they could avoid those. And it was a tremendously successful change. It took us 18 months to get all of those practices kind of up on their feet. And it was successful because we got better every single time. And the practices, all of the front desk staff, the MAs, the providers, and those in billing, they adopted the mindset and the behaviors necessary to be successful with that change. I remember at one point in time when one of the providers was very frustrated with how to document their care for their patient in the computer. And I remember I said, in a few years, you won't be able to live without this. Because they loved their paper. They didn't want to give up the paper. They wanted to keep it. I said, in a few years, you won't believe how you ever did this without your EHR tool. And I have to say, about 3 years ago, I went to that office for my own medical checkup. And that provider, they had a problem and they couldn't use their EHR for about a period of 3 days. And the provider said, you were so right. We absolutely cannot live without the EHR now. And so I think that that's an example of a very successful change, that the change management activities and the thinking about how to connect the practice managers made a tremendous difference in helping all of the stakeholder groups move through that change more easily and successfully. I think sometimes there's mistakes we make with organizational change management, just as we make mistakes in life in different situations. And mistakes are not the end of the world. There are some really common mistakes that I think uh, it's easy to fall into when you're an organizational change management professional. And the number one easiest to fall into mistake is believing that somebody knows about your change. We think about this change and talk about this change and plan for it. So, of course, in our minds, everybody knows about the change. But there have been many times when I've been surprised by change. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. You come into work or you are logging on at home and something's different in your system and you had no idea this was going to shift. And of course, it's always one of those days when you have to be on at an early meeting and you have no extra time for your computer to reboot, restart, to implement whatever technical update has been pushed your way that you didn't even know was coming. That's a common change that I've run into. Another common change is talking about, thinking about, and working on the change, and then mentioning it to somebody, and they have no idea what you're talking about. Just because we know something doesn't mean everybody does. And I know that's so basic and so elementary, but it's true. It's very true. It's so easy to get caught up in our own projects, our own change initiatives that we don't remember to tell other people, or we remember to tell them, but we think they retain more than they do. I think I've told you in past LinkedIn Lives and in my training, I talk about the Gallup study that discovered that rather than talking about an idea 7 times before people really understood, it applied to them, now we're looking at 9 to 16 times before people understand that what you are sending them, what you are talking to them about, it applies to them 9 to 16 times. So, for example, if you have a communication governance process that you must go through, and maybe that governance process is that you have to draft an email, and then it has to be approved by somebody in policy or somebody in another office, and then it can go to the communication governance group, and they usually need, between 5 and 10 days to look at the email, to prepare it, to send it out. You could easily run into 20 or 30 or 50 days to send out a single email. And if you need to send out one email a month for the next, for people to be able to recognize that this is coming their way, if you have to send out once a month, you need at least 9 months. And that means you need all of those 9 months need to be backed up by the 50-day waiting period. So it can be extremely daunting to try to get communication out quickly multiple times. And so sometimes we settle for less and less and less communication. And I think we don't want to be annoying, right? We don't want to have to keep sending these emails that say, hey, don't forget this is coming to you and this is happening on this particular date. But the other side of that is if we don't push on all of these communications, we have people who say, I didn't know, I missed it. I didn't realize that applied to me. So that's why we have to get it out so many times in a short span of time. And we can't just use email. I know that it's everybody's favorite communication tool. It is free and easy, but it is not the thing that people look at. And I am finding more and more, I'm kind of reverting backward to some older communication tools to really get attention. One way that I've been noticing things that are very change issues or change initiatives that are very important that people want to get in front of me, I have noticed an increase in the US postal system. Mail. I've noticed that I receive a postcard or a letter when it's an important change that I need to pay attention to. And I think it's effective because I get so little mail that's not just junk mail, that when I see something that's maybe hand addressed or looks like from somebody I know, I definitely open it. And so that's a great new tool, a new old tool. I also think that, email can be very helpful, but newsletters are very interesting. Videos are much more interesting if they're short and to the point. You can send an audio file, a podcast, you can send a flyer, you can send a link to a web page. I mean, there's so many options now for us to easily communicate, and in ways that are not just emails, because I have had a lot of project experience where I do hear, oh, just send an email, just tell them it's done in an email. But that doesn't necessarily help. So those are some common mistakes, really: not communicating enough, not communicating effectively, not communicating in a way that grabs someone's attention so that they know that this matters to them. I also think that using a change management framework, such as the Ready framework, the framework I've created and that I teach, can really be helpful because everybody is following along in lockstep with the READY. It's easy to use an acronym based framework because a word like ready is only spelled READY, right? We're not changing the spelling of that. So it makes it simpler for me to remember the order. The R for relevant, relatable story of change, the E for engaging leaders, and the A for advanced communication, the D for develop and support, and the Y for what to do and why of resistance, how to reduce resistance by addressing that why. And so having a change management framework is very helpful in terms of communication with the project team, communication with the stakeholder groups, and with other leaders, with our sponsors. It's also important to recognize that we have to be flexible with our frameworks. We have to be able to adapt to the situation at hand. So just because I have a framework doesn't mean that I can't be flexible and squeeze in something that's important. Perhaps a change agent network is really essential in this particular case. And if a change agent network is essential, I'm absolutely going to put the change agent network in place somewhere between the A and the D of the Ready framework. When I think of the standard for change management, we have 5 process groups. We have evaluate the change impact and organizational readiness, which is all of our assessments and all of our kind of planning stages. And then we have our formulate the change management strategy. So our strategy piece, where we're really thinking about strategically, how do we want to approach this change? And then develop the change management plan. And that change management plan is communications, stakeholders engagement. We have sponsorship plan. We have learning and development plan, resource plan. We have measurement benefit realization plan, sustainability plan. So there's a lot of planning that happens. And then 5.4 is execute the change management plan. And 5.5 is to close or complete the change management effort. And when you have those pieces as well as your Ready framework, you can flex in any way that you need to flex to ensure that you are providing people with the information they need to be able to adopt the behavior and the mindset to get them to the future state. And that's the successful definition of change, because then we are starting to realize and reap the rewards of the benefits that come from that change. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is just helping people understand change management to make it easier and simpler. It shouldn't be a mystery. It shouldn't be super overly complicated to the point that you have so many templates and tools you don't know which way to go. I'm actually working on a change right now where I found myself struggling with many tools because I have tools, they have tools, some other tools are, kind of baked into the legacy. And so it's a really interesting mix. Like, how do we simplify? How can we become simpler and clearer rather than more and more complex and complicated when it comes to leading a change? So if you would love to join a group of passionate and excited individuals who want to learn more about how to help people get ready for change, I'd love it if you would join our Ready, Set, Change accelerated training and exam prep cohorts. The first cohort this next year in 2025 begins on February 24th. And we just love sharing the Ready framework, sharing the standard for change management, and helping people to have a simpler, easier way to lead change and to prepare for and pass that CCMP exam. Now, I have to tell you that CCMP, the Certified Change Management Professional Designation or certification, is starting to just really take off. We've had tremendous growth over the last year, particularly in the Middle East and in Asia. So I think that this global certification is only going to grow and grow and grow. And if you are looking to obtain your CCMP, we'd love to have you involved in our course. We'd love to have you in our community. We'd love to talk to you just to support you and see where you are. We offer study groups that you can join at any time. We offer many tools and tips and other support mechanisms to help you pass that CCMP exam. And we also have just the most popular, most fantastic students that exist and as a part of ACMP Qualified Education Provider Training. So we'd love it to have you join us. Please send me a note if you're interested. But to think about, how to really help us use our change management techniques and tips in the real world, we just have to apply them. We just have to try them and say, I heard about this change agent network. Let me see if I can build something like that. And the great thing is that when you're working with people, they're very forgiving. And if you get a little bit lost or a little behind, you can always communicate and try to reset and focus on how to help those stakeholders become ready to adopt that new mindset, to adopt those new behaviors that will take them into the future state, that really once they have them, they are in the future state, so that we can be successful in change and we can help others to be successful in moving through that change, not getting stuck, but moving through the change so we can really realize the benefits of the change and really experience a much better future state.